The panel doesn't have like a fixed structure. I just wanted to take advantage of this beautiful gathering of perspectives and try to discuss between us a little bit and maybe debate and agree and also disagree. Regarding the title that I've chosen, Politics and Poetics of Listening, the Poetics of Listening comes from Brandon LaBelle's new book, Poetics of Listening. It was published this year. And by the way, he was also supposed to be here. Unfortunately, the dates couldn't work, but maybe next time. Very shortly, Brandon LaBelle argues that listening is much more than a passive reception. It is it is a site of inner life and self-care, which is listening into. He offers in his book around 4 or 5 different types of perspectives regarding listening. So it's listening to, it's listening toward. These are concerning the relational ethics. Listening with, which refers mainly to social justice, listening against, which refers to resistance, and listening across, which refers to ecological and planetary attunement. I would like to start with a question anyone can answer freely. Since probably all of you have been in touch in one way or another in your practices with the very rich and complex field of sound studies, which is also very interdisciplinary. While I was talking with some friends, also colleagues from anthropology, even though this very rich and very complex body of work in the past, let's say, couple of decades, it feels somewhat that it's still confined to academia and specialized art circles. So I'd like to ask you, how do we make this world of listening more public, more porous?
I think you're already doing it, Dragoș. I think this is your answer. I think by this very event, by creating as much events as this as possible, I think you are doing this as we speak.
Totally agree, I think.
The thing is, we in Romania, and I was discussing this also with several people, as we don't have a sound culture. We don't have the profession of sound engineers. Like a good sound engineer is, I don't know, it's his or her. It's usually his, because it's still a male-dominated scene. Their skill are just, I don't know, taken for granted, and it's without having culture of sound. It's, where do we start from?
I actually think it's worse.
It's worse.
I think there was a kind of an excitement and a growing out of sound into the world, and the kind of a practice. Because I mean, one of the problems is, and I think that listening is very important, but listening has to come together with an action of sounding. So I see sounding and listening as a kind of continuation cycle. Because if there isn't an action, it becomes a moral task of listening, even if it tries to be thick or poetic or anything else. I think it's really important that it's seen as a practice rather than a reception. But I think in our culture, it is often just seen as a reception mode, to consume something, to consume music, to consume knowledge. And I think there has been a little bit of a sort of an event of it's growing out a little bit, obviously, through events such as these and so on. But I actually think we're in a retrenchment period. And I think it's a retrenchment period back into the visual as much as we're in a retrenchment period back into a patriarchal world, back into a conventional, rational, post-enlightenment knowledge world. I think that speculative that you talked about, I think the kind of experimental, trying new things, is always under fire, is always being repressed in times that are economically and politically difficult, because it's too challenging. So I think we now actually have an even harder task than, say, 5 or 10 years ago to really get a sound study, a sound living, making, doing, listening, acting on it, popular, and I don't even know whether popular is still a good word, because that is so close to...
The vernacular?
To popular, yeah, or vernacular, and maybe we're... Yeah, I don't really know I have an answer, but I do feel we're a bit in a cul-de-sac with it at the moment. I mean, you know, obviously, absolutely, I love this event and I love all I think this is all really important. I don't want to be that negative. But I do think it's actually become harder rather than easier.
But with this, agreeing with that, I would also say, you mentioned, we don't have a sound culture. Sound engineers are just doing what they're doing, they're practitioners. I remember exactly that when we started working on sound studies, hearing from many people. And I feel the fallacy or the misunderstanding what here lies is just because something is not articulated and not explicitly addressed as such, just because of that, it's not necessarily that it doesn't exist. I would very much say that every culture, every nation, every environment has its sound culture, but it can, of course, always be more developed and always be more explicit and always be more reflected. That never ends. And especially when people think, we don't have a sound culture, I think that shows me that you have, because you need to explicate that. And because of historical traditions, technology developments, political decisions, political developments, and artistic traditions and developments, there is a sound culture here, but it's maybe not named. So I think for researchers in Romania, in Bucharest, in different areas of Romania, it would be the starting point to research, how is the sound culture in the rural areas, in Transylvania, in various rural or urban centers. And they exist, I'm very sure. And I've never heard of a country that doesn't have diverse sound culture. It's just that people think, there's nothing to hear, it's all silent. And that is never the case. So it's more a task, and that is, of course, harder, as Salomé rightfully said. But you can start with that. And it's always, let's say, small and hard and an uphill battle. But you can start with small efforts, with small publications. We have the established mode of podcasting, which has also horrible effects, but has also a potential to be used for good audio productions. Because people now at least appreciate, you can do audio productions, you can do them horrible, you can do them interesting. And with these skills, we can work as sound-interested people, sound scholars. So that would be my inspiration to say, yes, it's difficult, it's an uphill battle. We're a bit back, not to square one, but early on. But we can start from that and move ahead, because now the situation is so much more ubiquitous, and every person in this room has a sound producing, recording, and disseminating device in their pockets. It's like it is. And we can use that. And it's not utopian, it's very pragmatic.
Listening to you, just very briefly, what I think is the problem is not the vernacular culture of sound making. I think it's actually the academics and the academic disciplines and the academic institutions that do themselves so very difficult with sound, because it has this, it's vibrational, it's relational, it's indivisible, it doesn't fit into disciplines, it doesn't fit into institutions, it doesn't fit into funding proposals. Those funding proposals depend on those very clear, I'm researching this, I'm in this discipline, I'm not a musicologist, I'm not a art historian, I do stuff with sound and I write about stuff with sound, so how do you fund that? So I think the retrenchment doesn't happen in the culture among people, but it happens within the institutions that profess to speak for a culture. And I think that's where we have to understand that actually theorists always lag. Theorists are always behind. Theorists don't really grasp what is going on until it's long past. And so maybe I don't know, maybe it's an institutional rather than a sound problem.
Simina?
No, it's true. I completely agree. We just had a whole discussion in the hallway in regards to funding and all this kind of constraints of universities and who gets to get what and who has more privilege than the other, and all these kind of fences that we are constantly kind of like facing. And also the educational system, which is awfully colonial still and awfully failing to understand the person which sits in front of, and from the background that it comes from, and so on and so forth. So we all know that. And it is quite fine, because this is exactly why I left the conservatory when I was in acousmatic composition. I was quite late after like studying photography and video art, and then I realized, sound really changes the understanding of the image. So yeah, let's go to electroacoustic composition. And then I arrived there, and it was absolutely awful. I was the only woman, first of all, in seven brothers somehow, and all professors, they were all men, and everything was really one way. So it was quite hard to even understand, me coming from a background that doesn't have sound studies, or the understanding of this complex environment was quite a shock. Because of course, if you didn't study like here, you need to study a classical instrument, as Manja studied, because it's the Eastern Europe. So here you need to study a classical instrument to be understood or be accepted. So then it was the very brief chance to work with a computer as the instrument for the first time, but I was constructed again, funny enough, with Pierre Chaffet, with Pierre-Henri, white, colonial men that in the end just propagated the same kind of like fences that we try to escape. So,
can we imagine a democratization of listening?
Yeah, I wanted just to say, for me, it's pretty, I mean, from where I come from, participatory democracy, it sounds like cliche, but we really have
a little bit utopian, maybe
come back to it, because we wandered pretty much away from it. In a sense, the answer to what you asked is it's cultural policies and cultural politics, but to even get there, we have to really go back to geopolitics of the whole Europe. Look what Europe turned into now. Priority is definitely army and nothing else. I mean, I have this strange biography. I was involved in cultural activism a lot in my youth, and I was part of this group called Assault for Europe some 15, 17 years ago, that was basically recruited young artists and activists from all around Europe to work on cultural policies for European Union. And the idea was to really start from the grassroots and somehow build all these strands that we now have. They're called Creative Europe, or I don't know, there are so many hundreds of them now. They actually came from this, grassroots initiatives. We worked really hard to try to make citizen culture as the basis for cultural politics and politics. But, I was maybe 20-something when I was present in the European Parliament in the situation where there was like 4 days non-stop, day and night discussion about the budget for culture for the European Union. I mean, it's, you can imagine a very exhausting. People are sitting for 4 days and 4 nights straight arguing how much money should be given to cultural organizations, citizens organizations, NGOs, and civil sectors all around Europe. And after that, on the menu comes the budget for military. How long do you think that discussion lasted? And this was 20
2
years
minutes.
ago. 20 years ago.
How long did it last?
Pitch it, come on.
Now, I think the word grassroots is really a crucial word.
Yeah.
Because all the activities I was part in, or I saw, or I heard about in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but also Scandinavia, UK. Obviously, at the beginning, in a cultural environment, to do big grant application successfully never works. Because always people say, that's fringy, no one cares, what do you want to do? I would always recommend start with small workshops, start in a school where you're based, start in a university where you're based, in an academy, and a lot of you do that for sure.
Yeah.
I have done it. And from that, build on. And I can also say, so I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, so to be able to co-found the Sound Studies program at the University of the Arts Berlin. But also then, administration said, do you think you really have 20 applicants? Oh, that's a bit a lot. Is this really that interesting? So let's see. I think so. Well, let's see.
Yeah,
and
but
now
you
it's
have to
running
find
20
the
years or
ways.
so.
Yeah,
But
you have to find the ways.
exactly.
Yeah.
But you need to start at a small point and then see how it catches
But
on
it's
and not
not
lose
easy if you
energy.
live
Of
in
course.
like Eastern Europe with a lot of the history of repressive, very skillful repressive methods that culture is simply not funded. So the scene and everything around the scene, it's literally on people's shoulders. So, you know, for most of our lives, I'm a bit older than Simina, but we funded the culture ourselves. There is no, doubt about it, really.
But
and there is the whole generation of people. So it's really hard to even come to this resolution of actually having it as a professional. So you have to have 2 other jobs, even if you have 2 academies behind you, or you're a professor, or you're whatever. It's impossible to have a...
But don't be mistaken that this would be only an issue in Eastern Europe. I'm now
I
living
know,
and
it's a
working in
choice.
Denmark.
It's a choice, absolutely.
Danish
That's
radio,
why things are still working. Because
Danish
there
radio
are people
aborted.
behind it.
Danish radio aborted in 2012 all sorts of experimental sound art on radio. A lot of funding was gone. And also there, only the individual networks, activities, online radio, little parties, little festivals, they build up again that, and now they're recognized and they're banding together. So this activity, just to start something, when you're interested, continue that. Of course, it's hard, it's investing a lot, but at some point, usually critical mass of people come together and they can be recognized and there can happen something.
But
there's
they
no
cannot
guarantee.
survive for too long.
I know.
without help.
I appreciate
this
that.
is temporary usually.
Can I quickly go to your listening and democracy question?
Yes, please.
Because I'm sort of with David Graeber on, I don't really think democracy works. And I don't want to throw it away.
The project of democracy.
Yeah, I don't think that, obviously I don't want to throw it away because I know as we're seeing it dismantled in somewhere like North America, the United States, I want to also, understand the privilege of a kind of democracy that we're having in Europe. And I don't want to just say, this doesn't work. But I think there are fundamental problems with democracy in terms of its majority rule, which we experienced very harshly in England with Brexit. This idea that if it's 51%, that's it. That'll win. That's not a democracy. But that's what we call a democracy. We're not even speaking of educational, economic, gender, racial equalities or symmetries that have to be in place before a voting system can be called a democracy. But I think it's interesting then in terms of listening as democratic, because I don't think within this system that we have it can be, because I can only speak for England really because that's my most sort of acute political experience as an adult, that when you talk about listening, then we're not talking about hearing, but we're talking about what we've given to listen to, the discourse that we're given to listen to, and on which basis we're made to do our democratic decisions. And it's in England, it's very unregulated. It's a bit like America. It's in your face. Everybody's just the loudest will tell you something. Money, obviously, the people who own the Daily Mail, who own the newspapers, they're the people who construct the racket that you have to listen to. And I think it would take an extreme competency, and that's why I talk about sonic pedagogy and sonic education, a competency to start to understand what listening is and to distinguish it from hearing and to have an autonomy in listening. And only then, if we'd work through a few generations of that education, could we maybe talk about a listening democracy. So I would actually think at this juncture, we should maybe aim for a listening anarchy. Because I just think we might that way get eventually to the conditions for democracy.
Are there any risks here involved? Listening
Risks.
anarchy, anarchical listening?
Well, I think, again, if we sort of go with somebody like David Graeber, who is a political philosopher, but also an activist and very involved in movements like Occupy, I think what he brings to the fore is that if you have an activist movement, for example, that is anarchic or anti-fascist, that on the whole are very often, even if they have a vote, afterwards the winner has to take care of the loser to keep the loser on board and in the organization. In a country, you don't have to do that. You live here, it's 51% that way, you don't like it, well, leave then. And obviously you can't just leave. But in a sort of activist movement, anarchy doesn't mean, oh, we just do anything. But there's actually some care in that, some care in figuring out contingent communal operations. But of course, and that's an interesting point, everything we've celebrated, the thick listening, the vibrational, I think we can also turn that around and look at the risks and the dangers and how they have been abused. But that is testimony to the powerfulness of sound. And of course, it can be used in war. It can be used to oppress people. It can be used for all those things too. And that's why it's so important to wrestle it away, maybe even from the institution and maybe even from funding. In England, we equally don't really have funding. I think Germany is quite unique. Still, I mean, it won't last long, but at the moment.
When we talk about listening, what kind of attention are we really describing? Is listening an act of openness, or does it also imply selection, exclusion, power?
I would say all of the above.
Is this a rhetorical question?
Yeah. Maybe. I would say all of the above and even more.
I'm just dropping topics.
No, I think this is, for me, probably also for all of us, the beauty about it, that so many things are in there and it's transforming all the time. And I feel when people say, now we have listening understood and this is what it is, there comes another technology around, like
to organize,
exactly.
to frame, and
exactly.
so on and so forth. So that's the system. It's inherent.
Exactly.
It's inherent. You cannot entropy. It's part of the universe, and it's organization itself. So it's.
If you have to think of it as a concept, I think the closest would be a spectrum. You know, a spectrum is a concept that has different directions and different spectrum. But to refer to Brandon's book that you mentioned before, all of these different listenings that he mentioned and divided or articulated, for me, all of them could be squeezed into listening with as a concept. Because yes, if you go, you know, if you stretch the spectrum to, you know.
At this point, I would like to return to a talk we had this week in our online colloquium, Sound and Sensory Studies, where a colleague, sound art researcher and scholar, Jakob Eriksen, who works in Denmark, he had a talk on what he calls prepositional listening. It's also a bit of funny. It's also a bit of a, let's say, performative fun he has there, where he lists all prepositions related to listening. And Brandon worked on a handful of them, 4 or 5, 2 with, about, and so on. But you could could have even more. And I feel the fun about this list, when you imagine all the prepositions, at least in some Indo-Germanic languages where this works, you realize all of them make somehow sense. You can listening through something. You can listen underneath or above or against. You can listen against something. That's possible. But this shows the inventiveness of us as listeners, how we can listen to. And I feel this is the endless possibility that we have here, and the instability of these things. Well, I think we all, if we agree on nothing, we would agree, yeah, listening will always be transformative, and there will always be something new we can work with or need to work against, of course. And some things return, of course, never away. But that's part of it, I feel. Part of the listening.
But can I also be a bit of impatient with Brandon and his words and with listening? Because I think what I'm really interested in is the consequences of those various listenings. So the consequences of a sonic sensibility. Because we can revel in poetic listening and listening with, and we can enjoy it. But it's very luxurious. It's very luxurious. And maybe this answers your very first question. That maybe we're luxuriating too much in this irrelevance of listening when the people we might want to get into our choir want to sing. And they're not that bothered about the listening, but maybe more about, well, what consequences does it have if I think the world through this poetic listening? If I think the world through sound? What does the sonic turn make me think differently? Make me hear differently, make me do differently. And I can get quite impatient generally, but I think I can get very impatient with just staying with listening. Because it's like, yeah, that is like learning Latin again and again. But what does it actually, where is the paradigm shift of the sonic turn? And I think that's maybe where, because then you have to do workshops. You have to do it rather than talk about it. And maybe this is the general problem with sound. Maybe it's just not a sound study, but a sound practice.
You know, I was just thinking about that. It was like it's a form of, so it's anarchy, which is also attention, which is also attention because you care, and it's also desire to change something. So we go on, and we arrive at action. So it's.
But the most important thing is example, like in parenting.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. You both talked about listening, but you both made us do things. You know, so it's actually. You knew talking about listening wasn't enough.
No, but it's never talk. You mean talk about listening? Of course, it's not enough. Never.
It's failing all the time. I'm failing listening to.
I have a question. I have a question to you.
I make myself do things too all the time.
But what I hear from you, Salomé, is also an implicit activist listening.
Yeah, but even activist listening isn't going to do activism unless you do something.
Of course, no, I mean that. I mean that really literally performative.
Yeah.
Other forms of listening that are activist that we need more in our societies to change things in society, culture, institutions, whatever. Are there forms of activist listening?
Yes. Forms of activist listening.
Yeah.
I think there are many forms for activists.
We are talking.
You
about
mean
also,
if they have a political?
I'm just curious to hear.
Political or do you mean political or?
You name it.
Maybe activism is inherently political.
Exactly. That's why I just want to make sure.
No, but it's the listening bit we're questioning.
Yeah. I just want to go to concrete examples. Do we have
But
activist listening?
I think most of, and now for me it's hugely problematic. We have the whole. How is it called? The trend, for example, of soundscape composition. That's basically like soft artivism. It's become hugely problematic. For me, it looks like generally like a greenwashing, that people are making careers just for making it activism or artivism, and it's not going. I mean, it's not really. I'm sorry, it's not really active, but it's out there. It's very popular. I mean, the thing is, how to approach that with care, and it mostly, there is a lot. It's a question. The huge number of people who are doing it are also new generations. So you don't really just want to bulldozer, everything. You need some sort of approach to this situation. But for me, if there is a glimpse of this soft artivism, there is a nucleus that you can work with, So from any sort of, even as a, organizer or mentor or even just a listener or indirectly or somehow with your own example in a way, but kind of funnel it into something more activistic in its true nature.
But I don't think we can complain about all the people doing sound walks or soundscape compositions. And on the other hand, we complain there's not enough people doing sound stuff. Because I think I'd be happy for everybody to do whatever sound stuff they do and call it whatever they like.
Yeah.
But maybe the problem is with academia, with institutions and with discourse. And maybe, this guy from the 16th century that I briefly mentioned, Etienne de la Boétie, as the kind of first civil disobedience, or the first recognized civil disobedience guy, which I find really, it's all quite funny, him as an aristocrat and all that. But I think what I liked about what he said was that he really believed that it's the academic who needs to now take on his role and get people out of servitude. That was his kind of thing. He felt it was the academic. And then, of course, I say, okay, if it's the academic, it's also the artist. But then I sort of think, yeah, but that is highly problematic, and it's problematic because I think academics are doing... I haven't met an academic, and I'm including myself there, who's brought anybody out of servitude. And I think that's our failing.
Yeah.
And maybe
but
it's
that's
shifting
a
that
corrupted culture,
responsibility.
It's the question of the corruption within the culture. How do we produce the culture that is corrupted in this way, the same thing that you're mentioning, the guy with the civil disobedience thought that academics should free the people. We can tell that for this exact moment, for many places that, everyone is looking at intellectuals to kind of figure it out, do something about it.
By reading books of...
Yeah, so that didn't change really. And, intellectuals are, leftists sitting in their chairs and like, okay, what should we do about that? Don't do anything. Just let them all eat each other.
It was at some point a meme about this art activism and eco-activism, which was like, save the glaciers. And the person is eaten out by the glacier. Or save the trees, and then it climbs a tree, and then the tree falls and kills the... So it's kind of like...
It's part of the world. It's part of the
exactly.
world, but it's also quite good to, have some sense of... For example, what you said about the workshop, for me, it really has to start in a kindergarten for these situations that we are in it, and especially Eastern Europe, and with not having cultural politics and, having very, very destructive and corrupted systems, you have to start from your nucleus, really. It's silly as that.
Trauma and
like
transgenerational trauma. And
family,
so on,
and then the school,
and
you have to start.
But I would also say
small scale.
When we, in all nations, I think, complain about corrupt systems, we should not ignore that universities, but also the art world and music publishing business was never about activism. These are all elite leadership producing training systems.
Yeah.
Saying this, being a full professor at a university. I know that this, for the longer part of universities in Europe, this was the case. Since 1088, the first Bologna University, in our sense, was founded, up to today. And our idea that universities would be the harbinger and the breeding ground for opposition and innovation and radical revolution wasn't there before the mid-60s or so, really, in that radical sense. And it lasted maybe until the mid-80s. And after that, we were again back to a neoliberal restructuring, and we are there mostly everywhere. So it's only, I would claim, a brief moment in history where universities were really, at least in France and in some other universities, were ground for radical revolutions, also in the East and various others, clearly. But this is not the normal use of a university, and I would claim also not for the art world, and also not for music production business or music distribution business. We need, or the actors need to make that.
It's a business, exactly.
It's a business, yeah.
It's a capitalist
Yeah.
business.
And that is nothing new. That is more like continuing, but we can work within that and against it at a point. But it needs people who do that. It doesn't happen just because the academics would be inherently oppositional and so creative.
But I must remind you that all the students' movements are actually starting from students, not from the professors.
Exactly, and that's important.
And the professors are the threshold where it usually stops.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
I remember a situation at the Faculty of Anthropology of the University of Bucharest where students took up of a professor and then he intervened and compromised the protest completely and kind of talked on the students' behalf. So, yeah. I wanted to ask you, what happens when we stop listening?
We die.
Oh, no. I disagree with that. I think there is listening beyond death.
Beyond life?
Beyond physical death, yes. I mean, I can't tell you exactly how long my, exists, but it's definitely the moment of dying. It's not end of listening. You can find it in a lot of Eastern traditions, Buddhism, and all sorts of Eastern spirituality. They explain the process of dying as way longer.
Bardo Todor, for example, it's a good example of like the book.
Most famous, yeah. But it's a process. But then you have the healthy process that lasts for a certain amount of time. Like I don't know, I'm not a Buddhist, but 42 days or something like that. But then you also have deviations of all these living processes, like you have deviations in evolution, in this process of a life not fully ending. So the physical body ended, but other ways kind
energetic
of slipped
field
through. Yeah. It can last. It can be very problematic.
But I think you can also, if you don't want to go quite as far as death.
I
think
but it's still there.
I think when listening ends, also some really great stuff can happen. If I can briefly go back to this school in Bern. These kids have to always listen, as old kids have to do in primary school. They got to listen to their teacher about the stuff they tell because it's real and good and because it will be asked in a test a week later. So they have a very, very purposeful listening that excludes them entirely. And when we worked with them, so one session was we did sort of text scores that I wrote for them, and very naively thinking these text scores they would really enjoy. Yeah, you listen to this. So one was something like you listen to the most silent sound you can hear. You walk towards it and you mimic it and you make it yourself, thinking this was going to be really, spiritual for an 8-year-old. Blah blah blah. And of course that was the furthest on their mind because what they wanted to do was not mimic another sound. Listen and then mimic. They wanted to finally make their own sounds. So they wanted to finally make their own silence. So I think when they stopped listening, they could finally make their own sounds.
May I add a refinement of your formulation? Because I wouldn't say listening stops, but disciplined, purposeful, and harshly regulated listening ends. And then, unsurprisingly, I would say thick listening begins again, and a lot of different things come into play. And then this creativity can happen, because suddenly you're not in this corset or in this harsh chains of you're only allowed to do this and listen to this. You're not should listen there, that's wrong, and that's equally wrong, only there. And no one can move or dance or behave freely if you get this sense. So I would say the disciplining of listening ends here. Not listening.
Because it's not only not listening, it's also really making sound. Because when I'm, as adults, where we have different permissions. So if we're at a party and we're having a really good time, and we listen to our opposite, but we also want to talk. So we don't necessarily wait until the very last full stop every time, but already talk over each other, talk with each other, make sounds with each other. And these kids are never allowed to do that. So I think it isn't just thick listening. I think that's part of it, but I think it's hearing, and it's hearing yourself while you're making a sound.
How might the body be a site of listening and not merely a passive receiver? Because I think all of you partially touched this topic of embodied listening.
I think
Maybe
I think we go exactly like what Salomé said before. It's about this kind of participatory thing when the kid actually wants to do something with the musical object or any object in front to make a rhythm, to participate with that. So I think that actually a very good listening, it's with the hands-on with the material, and that was part of why part of my installations I tried to make them participatory, because everyone can be a composer if they have the tools in front of them. So, but it's quite interesting as well because this is a very infantile and very pure kind of approach, let's say, to participation. A child will always go and be hands-on with the material, but an adult, not necessarily. They will go and they will think, should I touch this? I don't know. Should I go and be with that instrument or not? Is it part of it? Am I doing something wrong? So there are all these kind of overthinking, so which are, I think this is where unlearning comes for us, because I think a kid can be molded much more easily.
Can I just wrap it? What you're saying?
Yeah.
It's called play.
Exactly.
And it's synthesis of
which
how you
adults
gain
have
it.
forgotten,
Yeah,
probably,
yeah.
or do
How
it
you get knowledge.
too.
But the play,
seldom.
play is nowadays used as a neurological therapeutic method, as something that is found out to be the biggest synthesis for learning and listening. Play comes very close to, improvisational performance and stuff.
Cheers.
And it's also tackles intuition as a possible tool that it's, underlying, so to say, structure of how things happen.
Can each of you please share an example where the body's listening revealed something unexpected in culture or identity?
And the body.
The body reveals.
The body's listening revealed something unexpected in culture or identity. Because, I will go to the wonderful, huge handbook of anthropology of sound, edited by Holger Schulze, which personally changed my life. From where I've learned that an anthropology of sound is an anthropology of the senses, because we don't listen only with the ears, but with the whole body. So, any listening situation?
I think it's vibration. I mean, it's a very quite interesting and deep topic, this question, that it's quite broad, but if we are going to war zones, and if they feel there, no?
Yeah, I think I have idea. Dreams. Sounds in dreams. It can reveal something cognitively unexpected. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Can you elaborate a bit more? I haven't thought that much.
Well, it's really the dreaming. It's quite individual for everyone, and the dreaming. It's stupid to say system, but mechanism of our body to regulate. with different contexts, whether emotional or, I don't know, depends, bodily stresses or stressors, or, from the environment, from us. And in dreams, some people don't hear sounds in dreams, but sometimes you hear a sound in a dream, and it can have a particular, it could address something or have a particular meaning, the same way that you can feel a feeling in a dreams. So that's what I thought, that within a dream, hearing something within a dream can be unexpected cognitively. Am I confusing you?
No.
I'm thinking immediately of all the moments when our embodied sonic knowledge or embodied sonic experience suddenly plays out. Like hearing a song to which we are reminded of a situation earlier. And for every generation and every people, it's a different thing. People in an earlier age might get crazy with one Jimi Hendrix song. Others might go crazy with one specific club culture song. And my kids go crazy for a certain TikTok sound. And suddenly they need to dance. They have an urge to perform this joy or this memory or the sadness or fado or whatsoever. And that's an embodied knowledge about which most people cannot willfully control. It's just there suddenly. And suddenly they're in that moment. Maybe when they heard this song the first time, or in relation to a romantic partner, or whatever. And this is embodied cultural, personal, biographical, also idiosyncratic experiences that the body reveals, I feel. And you cannot. Simply like it is, and people are different in that, and it's in our bodies. That would be, for me, a very typical, a very characteristic situation that maybe most of us have also experienced at one point or the other in our lives. This way, how the body has a knowledge, has experienced, has affects that we cannot control. Memory, yeah.
How the sound stays in a body in a form of memory.
Yeah.
What role might vulnerability or unknowing play in listening, in abroad all these types of active listening, thick listening? Because it feels like listening implies a certain level of vulnerability.
I'm going to take issue again with this word listening. I think hearing can make you very vulnerable, and when you hear something that really moves you, because I think listening is quite, the way I understand listening, let's put it that way, is quite a controlled action, as a controlled thing that I very often would use a certain methodology, or even unconsciously, or I'm listening out for this because I want to cross the road, or it's quite directed. It seems to have an intention. But hearing can really take you by surprise and suddenly, and interrupts you and gets into your body, and you then have to deal with it, and then maybe you will make it into a listening. You want to, in order to get rid of the vulnerability, maybe you wrestle it back into listening and get yourself back into charge of what you heard or what you're hearing, in order not to feel quite so overwhelmed. As you were asking about the expanded listening, the physical listening, I cry almost every time when I hear children singing. It's dreadful, particularly this time of year we're moving into. And so it is a real wrestling out of hearing them. Say you walk through a shopping centre, and all of a sudden there's this choir of children singing their things, their Christmassy songs. And then it's a wrestling back into, I'm not hearing it, I'm listening it, I'm okay, I'm not going to cry in the middle of the shopping centre. And so I think that is actually the wrestling between hearing and listening, and the vulnerability, and the attempted getting away from the vulnerability into a naming, into an organizing, into a classifying, and being able to move it into knowledge rather than the unknowing of hearing.
have a bit of problem with this very common distinction that you also propose between listening being the rational, directed, trained way. Okay.
But controlled, because
Controlled,
I'm controlling my listening.
Yeah. And on the other side, the purely physiological, unreflected, unconscious way of hearing. Because I feel the danger is that we make here, let's say subliminally, a body-mind distinction. And as far as I know, even researchers from a totally different camp in the neurosciences question that. They say there is no physiological listening. It's always physiological hearing, because that's what we often told. There's the pure physiological activity, we hear, no mind involved, and there's listening that's controlled. And I feel, and we both know that, and we all know that it is far more complex, but I totally hear the distinction between the controlled modes and the less controlled modes. But also here I would say it's more, I would more see a spectrum, that there's an axis, and we switch between that, between more controlled modes and less controlled modes. And the interesting bit is, I feel, how quickly the controlled mode can be forced to switch into an uncontrolled mode, which you just described. I feel that's I feel the interesting bit, that we think we're controlled. We're the shopping situation with our kids and doing this and that, and suddenly it hits us and we have no control. And so this is what I feel is the beauty also of it.
I would not even, hearing, the surprise I can have in hearing something suddenly is not just my body, it's also my head, my brain, my mind. Equally, the control of listening is also my body, because I often even, you sit yourself down in the proper way, pointing even, physically, opening your body to listen to what you are supposed to listen to. I actually, the distinction I only wanted to make between this being surprised, this, because you said, what is a surprise, what changes something. And I think that I sort of, in listening, I'm a bit more on guard of what might happen, in a way.
This just reminds me of like a quote of Roland Barthes, that he said at some point that I'm listening for a promise for pleasure. So if I'm listening for something, like and it was very close to fantasy situation. Or like, yeah.
I think it'll come.
Yeah.
I think the vulnerability is an access point.
Yeah.
It's an access point in the same way that trauma response, it's an access point to find out what's really going on, So it really depends, if Salomé says, on the methodology of how you want to approach listening, and what are you doing with it. For me, it doesn't have to be. It's what you say. It's controlled. It's not definite in that sense, because I tend to release rather than impose the attention into like really, really precise thing. Because I noticed that the moment, especially in the field recording, the moment when you're really into controlled mode, you are producing the soundscape in a way. Things are starting to happen that are synchronized with your presence there. It's weird, but somehow it's happening. It's hard to really pin it down, and explain it rationally, but it does happen. So active listening, in a sense, does not have to be exclusively, for me, fully control. There is something midway between release and control, but the vulnerability is it's an access point. So if you can live with it, and if you can accept to be vulnerable and go all the way to it, you can actually come into much more content listening than controlling your disposition. I don't know
so
how
it's
to
a step back, in a way.
I don't think it's so complicated, really. It's really a release. It's allowing to be vulnerable as well,
And I feel this can lead us again, what you just said with the Roland Barthes quote, which I would take seriously. When I teach sound studies, I often also go to sonic desires. And they are there. We have certain, inclinations to certain sounds, certain encounters, also to the erotic and sexual side, or to relationships. Relationality doesn't always involve only objective and clear and neat stuff, but also very messy situations where we desire something, but we know it will never happen. But how can you do that? And where we desire certain sounds, or we don't desire
listening.
We hate them,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And all these things, they are involved in listening. And the hard thing is that we have literally no control about them. A bit like a smell we hate. If we hate the smell, the situation can be as beautiful as it is, it remains disgusting. The same with the sound. The situation can be as beautiful, but if there's a music playing we hate, it still remains disgusting. Even, and that's the most interesting bit I feel, if we connect then something beautiful to this disgusting piece of music, which happens. And this is part of our lives. Frequently. And that is, I feel, always the beauty of affects, that they're so self-contradictory and so idiosyncratic, but they're part of our lives.
It's so interesting because the disgusting piece of music, because it's just a very perceptive, it's so subjective here. Because how a piece of music can be disgusting, because in the end we're going like, what? Yes, what? Yes, it can. How? Okay, let's talk. This is exactly where failure comes, and this is exactly where we are like conditioned to maybe to go back to the 12-tone equal temperament, you know.
I suppose what I mean, if Brandon was here, I'd like to ask him. Okay,
We'll
so
write him an email afterwards, really. And it's filmed. It's
Brandon
filmed.
is
You will
inspired.
see this panel.
so you're writing about poetic listening, but what would you write about poetic hearing? Because what I like about there's a slight shift in control and who is in control and what's the poetic and where's the poetic. And that kind of works for me also in the sort of sense of a post-anthropocentric, because listening is extraordinarily, or often, the way we often discuss it or it is framed, it's a kind of, it's a very anthropocentric move, listening. And hearing is a bit more maybe listening with, maybe that's why we like the listening with. There's a hearing with, a being with, and I'd really would love to know what a poetic hearing rather than a poetic listening is, in his view. If you're going to write to him, ask him.
Shout out.
The panel is going to be recorded and posted, and I will send him the question directly through the video.
Oh God.
Since we don't have that much time.
No, just the one
please,
thing. So
please,
we are
please.
talking about music. Music is the organization of time. So we are talking about time, how we perceive time. So now it's like this is the old discussion when if you want to put musicians to fight, you ask them what is music.
But I would also say, and that goes with it, music, organization of time, yeah, traditional. Today it's also organization of space, the same. So I think this is where we moved on with technology, that we can control in which spaces which sounds are, and we're not restricted to, if you want to listen to an opera, go to this opera house at that time of the week. This is not any longer the case. And this is the beauty of the technology and also the horror of it, that we can displace music and therefore organize a space. If, for instance, horrible music plays for a longer time in a train, we spoke about that, or other situations, we organize space through music also. And that is maybe today an even stronger issue because it affects societal issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Here
music
is
is
where the specialization comes and architectural work. Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely.
Music can also be understood as a convention between people, because in a way anything is music, even silence. I mean, there are so many types of approaches into contemporary music and experimental music that it's getting difficult to separate music from sound itself. But since we don't have much time left, and thanks a lot everyone who's still here, I wanted to really touch a little bit the topic of the non-human world, the secret world. And I want to return to Manja's talk where she mentioned that rightfully, that the human ear is very limited and our hearing or listening capacities are still like very, very limited. And I wanted to ask, what challenges arise when listening to a place or a non-human entity? How do we negotiate presence and absence in such type of listening or hearing? Maybe Manja, if you'd like to start.
I think I've recently, I was thinking a lot about it. I abandoned even the non-human as I don't know what it means anymore, really. But
is it too anthropocentric?
No. Just in a sense, would maybe I don't know. I'm still thinking about that whole thing. The zebra is thinking, but maybe something else beyond human or something, or even just to exclude the human. We have to find better ways to communicate this. But I guess we will. It's not such an easy question. For me, it's very important. The presence is never innocent in a sense. When you're present in a landscape, you are intruding. There is no doubt about it. And it's not a negotiation because nobody really invited you there. You just walked in there, as humans do. So at the very beginning, it's intrusion. Walking into a landscape, for example, for field recording, for me, it's intrusion. Really.
And working with data from a field, or like the terms with sonification of earthquakes, or like, I'm listening for the earthquake. Are you though, or you are listening to the data, which is a world in itself, and you attribute emotions and so on, whatever. Human.
Yeah.
So,
but the only way to negotiate it, I guess, is to start with certain ethics and certain awarenesses, and to learn as much as possible about the space you're entering, in a way, trying not to leave damage and not to appropriate it in ways that are commodified, or turn it into something completely different. It's not an easy task, really, but it's also something that sound people are not talking enough about. And I mean, there is a huge culture of field recording and technology around it. It's very invasive. It's very exploitative. It's pure exploitation, really, in its essence. But it's the same. Like we have to eat to survive, to sustain ourselves. So it comes as a similar question. If we would stop eating meat and plants and everything that we find out sentient, we wouldn't be able to sustain ourselves. So I think this question is getting closer to this sort of like really intrinsic situation. You cannot enter the landscape by not intruding.
I totally agree with your assessment, because there's a danger of, let's say, also greenwashing practices. But I feel, at least if we zoom out, the interest for the non-human, or other terms I find also interesting, more than or other than human, shows that there is a growing awareness that they have a right and agency. And I feel we're just starting as a culture to find modes how this can be part of our culture. And there are some modes that work and other modes that are simply just, as you say, exploiting, extracting the sonic labor of plants or animals or other people you do not know or you do not recognize as people. And that's very problematic, I feel. But it's a mode of processing that and going forward. And I feel if we as a planetary society have any chance of surviving the next centuries, we need to have a way of grappling with these things that we don't think are necessary but come from elsewhere, and we can embrace them. Because that's, I feel, the underlying deep and highly existential, even metaphysical effort we make currently. Either we kill ourselves or we don't. This is the
Yeah.
chance we have.
Well, I'm thinking about it a lot most of the time. It really, at this very moment, economics is something that drives the human societies. But economics is made as a construct that completely excludes the intelligence of nature, completely. Like the air that plants are making has no value. You know, if no one is it's not valuable, but it's actually sustaining us. We cannot live without air. The economic value of this air is enormous. It's keeping us alive. But we live in a system that is still so, you know, human-centered. It's basically destructive. So our next point, it's what you said, it's, you know, to bring some awareness of intelligence of nature that is way more intelligent than we are actually, you know. So how to approach it as a learning agency, you know.
If I just may, I sort of think, I mean, I'm sure there are already people working out how air can be traded on the stock market.
No, but I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to exploit it as. But
no,
I
understand. But I think I would like to take a moment just to, because if you say if we go into nature, we are always already intruding. I think that is for me a position where it's already too late, and then we can, as I absolutely, because I don't think we will survive. You know, but then we can talk about a palliative care. A stage in which sound can also help us, listening and hearing can also help us, because we will die out because we're just simply too many. Even if we decide from on tomorrow only to drink soya milk, it's just not going to help. And I feel that, but if we start with that, then we're not listening with, because then we really have completely embodied and taken into ourselves that we're not part of nature. Absolutely not part of nature. If we say me going into the landscape is always an intrusion.
We have to find a way to be part of nature.
Sorry,
Just to find a way to again be part of nature without full intrusion.
Yeah, because I think, because otherwise, if we would just say it is always an intrusion, I think that's the point of, yes, we are extra nature rather than there is an extra human.
Yes, but what I really thought, I mean, you are intruding like you have to eat in that sense, but once you're intruding, and what he mentioned is how do we negotiate it, I'm certain that there are ways to find out to be part of nature. For example, I mean, if you leave a body in a nature, it's going to devour it. When we walk in a nature regulates us. And this is what, it's my really, personal experience, what I feel with this energy work. I feel changes, you know, it's really a sense of regulation and walking into certain space, working with it. Because the space itself instantly is trying to regulate me or to notice that I'm present. So I'm making a change walking in it. So maybe it's not like a permanent, I don't bulldoze. It's, it's in a sense, that's not what I mean. It is intrusion. But once you're there, you have to work with it. It becomes, it's a new situation. I don't know if I'm clear enough.
We are part of nature in the end.
But you are part of nature. Nature is,
Exactly. If we are thinking about pattern thinking, we resemble, even our bodies resemble, like the roots, and so on. Like our dendrites, our neurons resemble exactly like the roots of the trees and the riverbanks and so on. Mm. So it's quite natural that you feel kind of soothed when you are walking in nature, because you are connected with something which is part of you already, I guess.
All the soothing thing about, the soothing therapies of forest bathing and stuff. I mean, the systems in the forests are complex, but they do work on a vibratory premises. They do regulate instantly whatever it is in the forest there. You cannot walk through the forest and I don't know how to explain that, but wherever you are part of any natural moment, so to say, you are leaving a trace of your presence. You cannot escape.
I would love to go now out into the woods, honestly.
Yeah. Romania woods are dark, are you sure?
Are they so dark?
Banasa there somewhere.
What was the question?
I completely forgot. I have something in mind regarding, are there any opportunities with the new advancements, the technological advancements in sound? For example, all these crazy microphones that we can use these days to listen to what is unheard by a human ear. For example, did you know that the male mice in their mating seasons sing serenades to their potential partners? And these serenades are sung on frequencies that the human ear cannot hear. And yeah, I was wondering, I mean, all this advancement and progress toward infinity, maybe we can actually get something good to better understand the world we live in, and especially the living ecosystem that surrounds us and which we are we are together within this ecosystem.
I mean, this is exactly the kind of like, okay, you have pessimistic thinking, and it's exactly like what something that destroys brings something new, which is a law of nature. So I think that at some point we'll bring something good, we'll have something good out of everything. I don't know, let's see.
Yeah. But this is exactly...
Salomé, yeah, exactly. So it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably the destruction will come first and then afterwards.
Exactly. But the good thing about these new technologies is, I think, and it goes back to the question to the non-anthropocentric or non-human, is that we are more aware of all the activities that happen around us. And the previous classical colonial premise that there's a terra nullius, there are no people, there are no actors, there's no one, it's basically empty, it's ripe for us good Christian male conquerors to extort, to excavate everything and to expropriate everything and to take that. This goes out of the window because we're more and more aware, no, there will never be and there never was a terra nullius. There's not a planet, part of the planet that was empty and void of life and existence, people, and beings that should be respected. I think this could be a good transformation with this technology, that we're more and more aware of that. But I feel this is a very slow process, and as we heard, it might be too late.
Painful sometimes.
Painful, but at least it's there, and yeah, maybe we need to acknowledge that at some point.
Hopefully by the end of this conference, everyone will go home with a very long list of books and studies and ideas to think about. This was the first day of the Sonic Turn conference. See you tomorrow, starting from 12. 12:13 is the first lecture, and yeah. God bless Romania and sound.
Wonderful.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.